You can choose to continue to live there and say we'll respect your ability to have your own communities as long as you obey certain basic laws and pay some taxes. Yes. Now, it's not a prescription I agree with, but to make out that it's incredibly draconian or aggressive or unreasonable is to go too far as well. Yeah? It's too much. They could behave far worse. And also, you're quoting prescriptions that were made back in the day during a different time. Now, you guys think these are eternal truths. I think they're culturally relative. So I'm seeing it differently to you. I can understand why 1,500 years ago, actually, if you had that prescription, you were probably being fairly benign according to the terms of warfare of the day. But it's a question of how you want to interpret those texts in the modern day. Yeah? And I assume raping women and having slaves is off the record. And you, just so you're on record, you don't agree with having slaves or raping them, yeah? Could you go a bit louder just so people know?
I don't really want to do it.
He does. I don't think that's fair. He doesn't want.
Just so they hear the
on the spot and ask you.
No, because like I said, I'm not an expert or that learner.
No, I'm just asking.
If you really want a Muslim perspective,
I'm asking how
then
you
there are
would
plenty
live.
here.
I'm not asking for a scholarly thing. I'm asking how you would live your life.
Why do you not want a scholarly thing? I don't understand.
I can do both. Right now, I can do both.
But I think it's better to have a scholar or someone more learned to actually have a fruitful discussion.
But I think that also you're a real person who is a Muslim, and I'm guessing that you're a devout Muslim, your religion works for you, I respect that, and that you people might misrepresent you as being somebody who, he's a Muslim and therefore he's into raping women and having slaves.
Yeah, but you can say that all he wants. Anyone who wants to believe that will believe that. Someone who is more reasonable will think there are so many Muslims in the world. Do we see anywhere all these Muslims going around raping girls?
Sure, so I'm just asking what you personally believe. Exactly, yeah. All I'm asking is what you personally believe. That's all.
To me, raping is wrong.
Thank you.
If I have to say that.
Thank you. So you don't think the Quranic prescription is condoning rape? Good. So he's not interpreting it that way. You're interpreting this as being about prescribing for rape and slavery. He is not interpreting it that way, and that's not what he's going to advocate doing with his life. Yeah?
So my question to you then is, how do you explain? Like, you have to have either tafsir ibn Kathir. Like, I don't know what tafsir you're going by, but how would you personally understand? So you're saying you don't believe that if a Muslim takes a slave in battle, that they can. I just want to be clear. Are you saying that if a Muslim takes a slave in battle?
Explain to me, when you're saying Muslim taking slaves in battle, what do you mean by that?
So let's go to the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he's going to war, and he's fighting the Romans, and they take over Egypt, they take over Jerusalem, wherever it may be, Yarmouk, and they find in their possession, from those that they're fighting, females. And they take some of those females captive. Now, I assume you believe that Muhammad and Umar ibn al-Khattab and their soldiers, when they took slaves, when they took female captives, Sabaya, they weren't in violation of Islam. Is that fair to say?
Whatever the Prophet did obviously wasn't in violation.
Yeah. And also the righteous caliphs after him. So Umar is one of those righteous caliphs. So in those instances, if they took female slaves, the Quran says that as far as I'm reading, as far as Ibn Kathir and all the tafsir that I've read, are saying that a Muslim man who takes one of these slaves, a concubine, which was very commonplace in ancient societies, they were legally allowed to have sexual relations with those women against those women's will. That's what I'm saying. And
I don't know what to say. If that's your interpretation, if you want, like you say, if you really want to know what is a Muslim's true interpretation of that, then bring a learned Muslim.
Okay,
even like basic initial questions come up where, on the one hand, you're saying non-Muslim females pay the jizya, but on the other hand, you're saying actually they would also become slaves. So which one is it? How do you decide if a Muslim becomes a slave or if they're free and they pay a jizya? This is what I'm saying, where I don't know enough. So that's what I'm saying. If you really want to know what is a Muslim's view on this, bring a learned Muslim and ask him these questions.
So on that, I agree with you. You speak to a learned Muslim, and that's why I feel guilty putting you on the spot, because you're literally saying, I don't know the Islamic answer, but me personally, I'm against rape, and that's a noble
Every Muslim
position
would
to
say
take.
That.
It depends what you define as rape, and if you define that you take a female captive, if you say that having relations with her isn't rape, I've got a mic, I think. If you say that her having relations with your captive isn't rape, then they obviously don't believe in rape. Most Muslims I speak to would say, if a Muslim walking down here can't just grab an English girl, a Christian girl off the street and rape her. Absolutely, that would be haram. But let's say you go to war, and you're talking in the Middle East, let's say, they have a war and they take female captives. And interestingly, when Hamas took Jewish captives, Jewish women, they described them as sabaya. Sabaya means a female captive. They rape these captives. They rape the hostages. And that's because within Islam there is a mechanism that allows the conquering Islamic army to take female slaves from the populations they overcome, and if they choose to rape them. Now, they don't have to take slaves. And so in many instances, most instances, the Jewish people were not enslaved because they were al-kitab, and unless the Jews were in direct conflict with the Muslims, so they weren't fighting the Muslims, they just lived in the land, what happened was they would find themselves as one of the dhimma, one of the people of the book that had to pay the jizya until they were humiliated, which was the verse that I always started on. And so I'll make it very, very clear what I'm saying. If Western society defines that as rape, so two populations are fighting, let's say Jews and Muslims are fighting, the Jews lose, the Muslims win, taking those females as slaves, most Westerners would say is immoral, and then being allowed to have sexual relationships with them against their will, we would also see as immoral.
We would agree that's immoral.
And so I think that's how you have to. And so I was asking the question to a Muslim. That's how I frame it. I wouldn't say, "Are you against rape?" Because everyone's against rape, but they wouldn't define that as rape.
Okay, you've said it's prescribed, and you've shown where you think it's prescribed.
Yeah.
You've shown historically where that.
I'm really sorry.
You've shown historically where you think that prescription was acted out by Muhammad and his people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet you were saying you think it's wrong. Okay.
So,
I'm now interested. Unfortunately, I find myself going. His point here now is coherent. Okay. He's giving the prescription from the book. He's giving an historical example where the prescription was acted on, and yet you seem to be saying you think it's wrong. Now, I agree with you that it's wrong, and I'm trying to fight your corner here. But how are you rationalising the fact it's wrong? If it's in the prescription.
I don't know.
I think he's been honest. He's Muslim. He doesn't want to insult his religion. He doesn't want to go against Allah. So he's not going to say what the Quran says wrong. He's going to try and find a better interpretation, or someone with knowledge who can provide a satisfactory answer. And that's the challenge. And I think it's unfair because if someone does the same to me with Judaism, I'll feel the same.
I don't know.
Okay, I think I don't know is a good answer.
Yeah.
But you personally in your life, you wouldn't rape or have slaves, yeah?
Whoa.
What kind of a question?
It's a reasonable.
What do you mean, whoa?
Are you thinking about it, or you? No, I think he was smiling because he was saying
I was smiling because
the question was quite.
Was ridiculous.
When I was younger, a police officer once stopped me at a bus stop and said, "Do you have any knives, guns?"
Yeah.
And then he said, "Do you have any bombs?" I actually looked at him and said, "What do you mean?"
Oh, okay, like that. Yeah, something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't, right? You didn't have any bombs.
Otherwise you wouldn't be here, would you?
I left it at home.
I'm asking you the question because I'm confident you're.
It's a fair question.
And I think you already did. It's not an unfair question. Given what's followed before, you in your personal life, you realise that's immoral. And you're humble enough to go, I'm not sure how to square that ethic with what I've heard, which is at least constructive, At least everyone's being honest and we can see that. I don't believe most Muslims advocate.
Just to defend his position, in the Torah, which I follow, you'll find slavery, you'll find all these concepts.
Right.
You won't find sex slavery in the same way, but you will find that women can be enslaved, and there's mechanisms that are put in place to try to prevent rape.
There are terrible things in the Old Testament.
And so that's yes. And you don't want to do anything from a more liberal perspective, yes, 100%. We don't read the Torah literally, and it's a separate conversation.
If I started arguing, hey, Jews believe that you should burn to death the daughter of a priest if she was a harlot, which I've got a series of things in my backpack, which are from the Old Testament. There's some appalling things, like kill anyone who works on Sunday. I think people here are working on Sunday. We should be killing them.
It says Sabbath, which is Saturday, but
okay, so that's fine. Okay, so if you come down, you know, there's a number of things which are said in the Old Testament which are appalling. Now, I wouldn't dream of pointing the finger at the Jewish community and going, you people advocate this, this and this. We understand that they're taking what's literally written in the book into a more constructive context. And because I'm going to extend that I'm going to extend that charity to the Jewish community. It's not a charity, I think it's common sense, right? It's reasonable to extend it to the Muslim community as well.
Can I explain the tangible difference between those two examples? So first and foremost, Jews have never read the Torah literally. So we don't believe that these are literal things that we have to do. So for instance, any of the capital punishments can only be mandated by a Beit Din, a religious court. Okay. A religious court, there's an expression from the Talmud which is what defines what we have to do, that says a religious court that puts one person to death in 70 years is considered a bloody court. Now if you think how many people the Americans kill every year for treason, etc., you begin to understand that Jews weren't carrying out capital offense. So now to bring it back, the tangible difference here is the people that it's talking about are either Jews or people that no longer exist in the Old Testament and the Torah. With Islam, these laws which I'm citing, or these verses, these ayah in what's the plural for ayah? I don't. Okay. Religious verses in the Quran. These religious verses in the Quran actually were applied to Jewish people. And so there were Jews that were enslaved, there were Jews that paid backbreaking taxes, there were Jews that found themselves under new rulers, and now...
Were they adhering accurately to the description when they did it? And also, can we try and bring it up to date?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe they were.
Moses sanctioned having a guy stoned to death, I think, for working on the Sabbath, okay? So I could lay in and go, here's a practical historical example of something written in the Old Testament by one of your top guys acting on it. But I'm not going to do that because I think...
So let's bring it to modernity. And I think I can give you numerous examples of where religious Muslims have taken women as slaves, sold them and abused them and raped them. You will not be able to give me one example of any Jew that was stoned to death, killed for breaking the Sabbath. That's my point. This is literally something which people suffer from by people who are interpreting Islam in a literal
I take your point. I think Judaism has managed to update itself more commendably and to not take itself as literally as Islam does, I think in conservative Islam, for me personally, it is a problem taking it so phonetically, literally at every level.
I don't like that term, that's the thing. I don't think there's such a thing as conservative Islam. I think there's Islam.
There's a spectrum. The difference between a Sufi, a Sufi is clearly at one end of the spectrum.
It's got nothing to do with conservative, or moderate, or any of the, or Islamist, or any of these terms that Westerners impose on Muslims.
Let me try.
Okay, sorry.
Within Islam, there is a spectrum of belief. Forget left and right. Can we agree there's a spectrum? Not all people who self-identify.
100%.
Okay, now I happen to pick left and right. Pick a different term. But there is a spectrum. Within that spectrum, some people seem to take it more literally than others. Now, I'm in favour of religion not taking itself so literally, whatever the religion is.
That's right.
That's my personal view. Is that there's good stuff in these religions, but taking them too literally is generally problematic.
But I think
with respect to Islam, conservative Islam might be falling into that trap more than maybe Judaism has done. But nonetheless, there's clearly good practical stuff in Islam that works in people's lives.
I don't think Muslims
and I don't want to see
it
damned as just a simple black and white issue because of a warfare.
I don't think any Muslim would believe it would go along with what you're saying. Or the overwhelming majority of Muslims, I can't say any. Muslims believe they're on al-haq, they're on the truth. If something is the truth, you can't moderate it, you can't interpret it to a more progressive understanding or more lenient or any of the terms that you would use. So I can give you examples of Sufi from history that did bad things. Literally what we're talking is that Sufis weren't moderating the religion and making it more progressive and liberal.
Again, you're giving the history, I'm saying the prescription. If I go to a Sufi prescription, it's going to be really quite different from a more conservative prescription.
What's a more conservative prescription? Like, this is the thing I'm struggling with. These are you're imposing a Western framework.
You've acknowledged that there's a spectrum within...
No, I'm saying Sufi believes he's on the truth. He's not deviating from the truth. He believes he's on the truth. The Eshi dogs, may they burn in Jahannam, they believe that they're on the truth. They believe they're on al-haq. So they all believe they have the truth. It's not a matter of interpreting away from the truth for a more liberal.
Before I came here, coming down Edgware Road, I happened to have a chat with the policeman who reverted to Islam. His name
converted. You don't have to appropriate use that language.
He calls it revert, and I whatever.
You weren't born a Muslim.
I was just if you believe that everyone is born a Muslim, then to call it reversion, I was just trying to...
Whatever, yeah, it don't matter.
Yeah, but you're not Muslim, so you don't have to.
I'm just trying to show some respect to their way of looking at it for a minute, okay?
Just
That's all I'm trying to do.
continue.
Okay.
Go.
I believe his name's Paul. We had a nice
Muslim.
chat for about 20 minutes.
Good Muslim name.
And he was a very good guy, and the reason he was into Islam was because he said, I noticed when I was brought up as a Christian there was more hypocrisy, people came to church then they behaved differently. Within Islam, I like the discipline, I'm an ex-boxer, I see them walking the walk, and he's not really particularly interested in talking the talk, he's interested in just living the life. It works for him, you can see it works for him, and I applaud that. So whatever happens of all of these discussions where different religions are arguing with each other, I want to have enough space that certain people can embrace Christianity or Islam or Judaism and make it work constructively in their life. So if you can not completely kick the shit out of each other in the process, that'd be really good. And I know it's even more difficult now you've got a warfare situation. But there are good Muslims, yes?
Of course, there's good heavy people.
Great.
You're missing. I'm talking about scripture. I'm not talking about people.
To just occasionally chuck that into these discussions.
Why?
Acknowledgement.
It's not relevant.
Why? Because it's not relevant that there are.
It's
good
obvious that there are good Muslims. It's obvious there are
if
good
it's
Christians. It's obvious there are good Jews. It's obvious there are bad. All societies have good and bad people. We're talking about the scripture. We're talking about ideology. It's like me saying to you. You have to accept and admit that there are some good Nazis, even though that idea of international socialism, maybe they weren't involved in the camps and they were actually just working in a factory, but they bought into...
When I say a good Muslim, I mean someone who is taking the text and he's interpreted in a way which makes it constructive in his life and in a way which is constructive for the people around him. Okay? I think that's what I mean by a good Muslim. I don't mean that necessarily they've got it exactly right, but in Paul's case, he doesn't care that much. He thinks a good Christian can go to heaven and a good Muslim can go to heaven, which means he's not running with the technical truth of the thing, but
he believes he is running with the technical truth.
No, he doesn't. What he says is, I've taken from it what works for me. I obey the 5 pillars, I pray, I don't do alcohol, my life works this way, and I say good for him. So I don't want to bash his religion to the degree that it upsets
what you have to find out is if he rejects. So the issue isn't... so every Muslim I know that does incredibly good deeds bases it on the Sunnah, bases it on the teachings of Muhammad, the Quran, and they can give sadaqah, they can give charity, they can do righteous deeds, and it's all based on their taking the good from the religion.
Right.
That's not... The question is, do they reject those verses and hadith that have caused huge pain to people that have found themselves under the caliphate, under the Khilafah?
They're both questions. If you want
well, I care about more the one that's led to oppression of Jews.
I know, and I'm saying I can chew gum and walk at the same time. I want to look at the positives and the negatives because the amount of weight you give to each gives the right counterbalance.
It's lovely for you to do that from your European ivory tower of safety.
I'm not being ivory tower, I'm just trying to be objective. It's simply objective.
In my neighbourhood,
advocate and you look at a
in my neighbourhood, you don't have that luxury. In my neighbourhood, when they cross over the border and take Jewish women, rape them and call them sabaya, you care more about... You're not so... I wonder what good verses Hamas take.
Oh, you're no longer interested in the ethics, really?
And I'm literally responding that Hamas have very good charitable infrastructure for people of Gaza.
You seem to be arguing that suddenly the ethics take second place to the reality of the situation. And I think if you want to adjudicate the reality of the situation, you have to make the ethics be at the heart of it. You're making ethical arguments, and I need to know your ethics.
And I'm telling you, it's from the... I'm literally going to the Quran, and I'm saying taking sex slaves is immoral.
We agree it's wrong, and our friend here has also said it's not something you would advocate.
No, he said he doesn't feel comfortable answering because he doesn't have the knowledge.
No, to be clear, we asked in his life. He's
take it. Okay, no. So let me just be clear.
How do I reconcile it? And I said, I don't know.
He says he doesn't know. He was very
just so I'm very clear. So, and I want to be. I'm really sorry to do this, but you're in the conversation, and I know you'd rather not be. When Muhammad and his armies fought the Jews and took captives, women, girls, from those and forced them into what I would describe as sex slavery, the most charitable explanation you would say is slavery, would you say that that is immoral?
If he went and attacked some people and then took girls as slavery...
Let's say they attacked him first, David.
No, but this is what I'm saying. Like all you're giving me is like a brief thing. As soon as I ask you a single question, like no, but let's say this. There was no point in me saying I agree with it or disagree with it unless I know all the facts. No.
Okay. Yeah. So you're saying. So let's paint a hypothetical.
I'm going to be very clear. I've always said this. some truth to what you said.
Yeah.
Is that as Muslims we believe you cannot change the religion,
Yes.
Sure.
whether you like it or don't like it. Even if, for example, there is something in Islam or Judaism or Christianity that any of us don't like, that
Yeah.
to me that is not a reason to not believe in it.
Sure.
Yeah? To me, it's only if something doesn't make sense, you shouldn't believe in it. So whatever the Prophet did, to me, is correct. Now, what he's saying is, if he did this and this and this, unless I know all the facts, what I'm saying is, whatever he did, to me, I agree with.
Okay.
I can't be any clearer.
That was very clear and very honest. I wouldn't.
But I'm
I couldn't run with that
interested in what he's
ethic.
saying, like where you're saying Jews have done a good reason.
Yeah, in the absence of more context,
Jews have done
I
a
couldn't
good
just
reason.
go whatever somebody did is automatically right. I've got to inspect the action
You're
through a
saying
slightly more, critical lens.
what you
One of the precepts of Islam is to accept that whatever the Prophet did is morally correct. And
it's the best example.
Okay, which is where I have issues with some aspects of Islam, but I'm certainly not damning the whole thing just because of that. Yeah.
The same grounds on which you would label someone a good Muslim may be the grounds upon which another Muslim may label that person someone who's fallen into disbelief for watering the religion down.
Yeah.
Okay, but where
So
we
it's
might have
purely
common
subjective.
ground is we'd all agree that if they're obeying the 5 pillars, I'd say they're being a good Muslim. I think all Muslims would agree that if you're following the 5 pillars, you're on a positive path. I'd agree with that as well. So we have common denominators for what we consider positive, I just want us to understand where we have commonalities as well as where we have conflict,
Yeah.
If you just only ever pay attention to the conflicts, it doesn't help the conversation. You need the counterbalance, which is why I want Joseph. He says, why should I mention that there are good Muslims? It's obvious. It really would help occasionally if
Joseph, to be honest,
for you to
what he's
occasionally go, I
saying,
do get that there are good Muslims and there are
you
people...
said it is obvious, and then you said just like with the Nazis, there may have been some good Nazis. Are you saying?
Yeah,
I wouldn't. I'm saying
not a
that's
good
his argument. That's not what I would say.
But with the Nazis, I'm sure 99% of them, they did horrendous things. Are you saying with Muslims is like that, and you've got the kind of odd Muslim who is good, or are you saying on average most Muslims are good people?
So I
and
would,
they don't harm other
I
people?
would say Islam as a religion is broad enough that it can be interpreted and someone can lead an incredibly righteous life and give sadaqah, and they are on the haq.
I'll
They
talk
are
about Muslims right now.
I'm trying to respond directly. And then I've got mics. And then you have other Muslims who are following the religion to the T, and they do things which I would consider beyond the pale and immoral. And so I would look to someone like Jabal al-Nusra or any of the militant groups in Syria. A lot of them, not obviously any, but a lot of them are following Islam to the T, and they take sex slaves and they do things that I would see is beyond the pale and hugely immoral and clearly not the way of God, if God is truly righteous and moral and is truth. And so for me, Islam itself, scripture, enables. I'll give you an example. I was just pulling up one of the.
Sorry, you haven't answered my question. What I've said is,
maybe I missed
the majority of Muslims, to you, are they good or bad? Because
I
the example you gave,
there's no way.
you don't know.
So what I can say is that
Here's-
I've met as many, probably more good Muslims than bad Muslims. Is what I can't say about every Muslim in the world. My anecdotal experience is positive, overwhelmingly.
Okay.
However, I would also
rationally-
say the only people who violently assaulted me for being Jewish, I've never been assaulted by a white supremacist, by a Hebrew Israelite, the black Hebrew Israelite. I've only ever been assaulted by Muslims.
Okay.
And so there's clearly bad as well. So I have a positive
There
and a
is clearly
negative
bad.
experience. And for me, I don't want to focus too much on Muslims. And I will go even further. I'll say many of the Muslims that I have positive experiences with are basing it on the Sunnah. They're basing it on the
focusing
teaching.
on the Muslims to a huge
No,
degree.
what I'm trying to say is I want to focus what you were saying on the scripture,
Okay.
because I believe that the scripture, the Hadith and the Quran
Yes.
are broad enough that you can lead to serious oppression of Jews, which has happened in multiple caliphates.
That is a danger. You can counterbalance it by going, but in practice, huge numbers of Muslims are actually behaving very well, and that is your experience, yes?
Again, no. I live in the West. I live in the West. Well, I lived in the West,
Yeah.
which is very different to if I was living in Egypt as a Jew. If I was living in Egypt as a Jew, my experience would be very short. I would probably be killed in a very short space of time. Jews don't fare well in the Arab world, which is why 850,000 of us were either ethnically cleansed or fled. And so
Okay, I mean,
it's very easy for me. It's very easy for, as I was talking about, you're sitting in a European ivory tower where you're relatively safe. In the Middle East, it's a very different experience.
Of course, I'm not coming from a cultural perspective. I'm coming from an ethical objective.
So, ethical objective perspective. Here's where I want to go. Malik related to me from Nafi that Abdullah ibn Umar made two of his Sabaya slave girls Mudabbara. Mudabbara means that they can be freed. And he had intercourse with them while they were Mudabbara. So these are slaves that have been designated to be freed, and he can still have sexual intercourse with them. By modern standards, that's rape. Most Muslims, if you show them that hadith, are going to have a problem because they can't say.
But our friend here is being honest about the problem, which is good.
Yes, and that's why I don't like putting him on the spot, because he can say,
good.
And it's something that I have the same issue with. If you read something in the Torah which you struggle with, you look to people with knowledge to provide an answer that's satisfactory, and in most cases you will find that answer. But I think Islam has a challenge because slavery is mandated, and Muslims operated the largest slave trade that has ever existed.
I don't,
and that's all based on this.
I don't really care unless it's in the prescription.
But no, it's based. We've just been through that. I just give you an example. I just give you an example. Yeah. So the prescription's there, and that's immoral.
It's just, I think if I dive into the Quran, I'm going to find a number of other prescriptions which are about. Hang on, let me finish.
You have to bring it though.
Let me finish. I haven't brought it with me today, but I remember. I think it's Surah 177 and whatever. Having read about the first 100 pages of the Quran only, I found prescriptions in the Quran which are very benign, very empathic, very inclusive, and they sound very
inclusive.
Yeah, inclusive.
For non-Muslims,
it would seem so by my reading.
Please bring those.
Okay, about just charity and treating people well and thinking about other people.
That's talking about Muslims. Zakat applies to Muslims only. Sadaqah is for Muslims. It's not for non-Muslims.
Really?
Yes.
There's nothing in the Quran which says that you should treat people generally well.
I'll give you a great example. Sure? One of the verses you'll hear time and time again, it's probably one of the things you've read, is that someone who saves a life, it's like they've saved all of humanity. Someone that takes a life, it's like they've taken all of you. Literally, you should read the verse before that, and that verse is saying this is what we told the children of Israel, the Jews. And the verse before that isn't as positive. And so people cherry pick verses out of the Quran and take them out of context. So you say you've got all these verses, it's on you to bring something. I'm bringing a lot of evidence to support what I'm saying, and no one's bringing anything to counter it. Just I've read or I've seen Muslims, and I've met some really nice Muslims, but we're dealing with the scripture, and we're looking at the historical record of how Jews were treated, how Muslims operated the largest the largest slave trade that's ever existed. Muslims took Jewish slaves, Muslims took sex slaves. Muslims today are doing this, and Jews paid back-breaking taxes under the jizya, which the Quran says you pay until you're sagirun, and so humiliated. And so if you're saying, yeah, but I've met some nice Muslims and I've read some verses which in context, I'm assuming you're saying in context, seem to be very inclusive and pluralistic and egalitarian, then mate, you have to bring it, because I brought a lot to the contrary.
Okay, I didn't bring it with me today. It's the impression I got. It's what I hear a lot of Muslims advocating. A lot of Muslims,
What's the point in, like, are you here to say that Islam is false? Are you here to say that Muslims
I
are
obviously
violent?
think Islam is false, otherwise I'd be a Muslim.
No, but is that the point of this debate? Is that why you're bringing on...
No, so the point of this debate is I believe that Islam, when practiced literally, when followed to the scripture, close to the scripture, leads to Jewish women being captured and taken into captivity. What happened on October the 7th? This is in my neighbourhood where I live. What happened to Jewish women? So, they were enslaved.
So are you saying that, for example, all the Muslims who live in the West, they're not practicing Islam literally?
They are. Islam teaches it's explicit. When you're living in Dar al-Harb, when you're living not Dar al-Islam, when you're not living in the Muslim world, but you're living in the non-Muslim world. Dar al-Harb is the world of war. You have to follow the law of the land. And in this land, in the UK, slavery is forbidden. And so, of course, no Muslim's going to advocate.
So, are you saying in Muslim countries there is slavery going on?
Up until very recently, and it was only due to Western pressure, slavery was legal in most Muslim states. Yes.
Sex slavery. So you're saying
there's no difference in Islam between slavery and sex slavery.
Okay, so what you're saying is, up until recently, slavery and including sex slavery was commonplace.
Yeah, legal. In Saudi Arabia in the 50s you had slave markets. Mauritania still has hundreds of thousands of slaves, yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
So did this happen in Iraq, in other countries where Muslims, for example in Iraq, where there was a large Jewish population, Muslims were going around capturing Jewish girls?
No, that's not what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is the slaves that most Muslims took were from Africa. And when the Quran's taken out which your right hand possesses, that's when you're going to war. So if the Jews in Iraq were fighting the Muslims in Iraq, that's when they would take them as slaves, but that's usually not what happened.
But why was
the
it not happening, for example, in Iraq?
Jews often sided with the Muslims, or they had no power to side with anybody. There were no Jewish kingdoms for the Muslims to go to war with. The first time we have a Jewish kingdom, guess what happens? Jewish women are taken as captives.
So, for example, why was it not happening in Iraq? Why?
Because the Jews weren't sovereign in Iraq. The Jews were subordinate to other empires, the Babylonians, etc.
No, I'm saying in like modern times, why wasn't it happening in Iraq?
Because the Jews were never sovereign over Iraq. The Jews weren't going to war with the Muslims in Iraq. That's what I'm saying. Sorry if I'm not being clear.
So sorry, what you're saying is, in your examples, you can only do this if there was a group of Jews and they attacked Muslims.
Or if you purchased the slaves. So I'm not sure what the legal precedent for the Ottoman slave trade was, but the Ottomans took more slaves than any other people in recorded history. And they were religious Muslims, and there was precedent in Islam for this. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to be as clear as I can. But slavery is permissible in Islam. Nobody would argue against that. Muhammad sold slaves. Muhammad kept slaves.
And it's permissible in Judaism as well.
But the emphasis is, I wouldn't argue with that.
I know.
But the difference is, nowhere in Judaism does it say what your right hand possesses belongs to you.
No, it doesn't say you can have slaves, it does say you can...
Why does it matter
it says some terrible things. Yeah? Your counter-argument is...
Jews are not commanded to take slaves.
Your counter-argument is that you guys don't take your texts as literally as a lot of Muslims.
Are you saying I'm commanded to take a slave?
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying if you go to war and you choose to take a slave, you can. And I'm saying
just
that
like
you can.
Jewish, you can.
No, you can't do that.
According to his prescriptions, according to prescriptions of the Old Testament, you probably could.
So in Judaism, the whole thing, you have to release your slaves, etc. You have to free them, but
which means it's okay for you to have them in the first place. So let's be clear, because Jews don't get laid into for the literalism of their text, even though it's got appalling things in it. And I could do that, but I don't see it as constructive, because I understand you don't take it so literally.
But Muslims do, and Muslims are much more literal with the text. I always have this struggle when I speak to Muslims, because they don't understand how I can read the book and read it in a different way to the literal reading. And that's, for instance, an eye for an eye. When a Christian reads an eye for an eye, it means that if someone takes your eye, you can take their eye. The Jewish interpretation, which comes from the Talmud, which is similar to the Hadith, is that if somebody takes away your eye and you are a jeweler and you need your eye for your craft, then you have to be compensated for that, for whatever financial loss you will make, because you can no longer see.
Well, also, if you're a Christian and you hear an eye for an eye, you've got to juxtapose that with turn the other cheek. So now you've got an apparent inconsistency because you're being told to do two different things, and you have to grapple with how you're going to work that thing out. Yeah.
But
so you can't just look at one prescription. You've got to look at the whole thing.
Just out of interest, if an eye for an eye meant if someone harms you, so for example, let's say if God forbid someone kills your son, you can kill that person. Would you accept that?
You can kill that person. So in Judaism, no person.
If an eye for an eye had the literal meaning, would you accept that?
If eye for an eye was a commandment from God and it had a literal meaning, then that would be fine. But that's not what I believe. But yes.
But you accept
But that's not what Jews believe. So literally, if God commands you to take someone's eye, if they take your eye, then if they take your son, you take their son.
You're talking about religious Jews as opposed to secular Jews.
We're obviously talking about religious Jews, but that's not what the text says.
It's not, to me, it's not obvious, and this is the point of issue with us.
Only a religious Jew would believe that something is a divine commandment from God. A secular Jew wouldn't believe that.
We've attempted to have this discussion before. The term Jewish gets used to mean one of three things. It gets used to mean a belief system. It gets used to mean a genealogy.
Let's not have this conversation.
I know,
again,
because I know that you. This is, I think, the tape that we lost, which we were discussing. Okay?
So that was a long time ago, and that's when I said I lost that. Oh, you're saying that's the one we lost?
Yeah, the one which you said you gave me, which we lost, right? Was that I think these conversations get blurred by the fact that the term Jewish can be used to mean a genealogy. It can also be used to mean a faith.
Yeah.
Now, if I attack somebody for their genealogy, I'm being racist and I condemn them, yeah, for sure. But if I want to take issue with your faith is your choice, and therefore I'm perfectly entitled to take issue with it.
Another time,
we probably won't, because you're going back to Israel. Hang on. So what happens often, I think, when you're discussing this with certain Jewish people, they hide behind, they'll accuse you of being anti-Semitic if you want to take issue with part of their religion or their politics. When it's not anti-Semitic, it's not racist to take issue with somebody unless you're doing it for their genealogy. And I would never attack anybody for their genealogy. But
I've got to get back to this. This is a tangent. Can we wrap up this conversation?
No, it's not a tangent.
It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're talking about Islam.
I'm trying to be constructive on all sides. You want to talk about Islam, I want to talk about the
that was the conversation.
Okay, the conversation that we had on tape that went was I reserve the right to make constructive criticisms of the state of Israel without being accused of being anti-Semitic and racist. Is that reasonable?
Yes, that's reasonable. There's no argument.
Thank you. There's no argument for that. Joseph, because people like Ben Shapiro of late, since the
I
attack.
can't speak for Ben Shapiro.
I know you can't, because I'm not asking you to. I know you're not Ben Shapiro, and I appreciate what you just said.
I speak a lot slower.
But people like Ben Shapiro, prior to the attack, he's on record as saying not everyone who is anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, yeah? But everyone who is anti-Semitic is anti-Israel, which I thought was a reasonable statement.
I actually disagree with that statement, so that's an example of
okay, well, Ben Shapiro, I have him on tape and I can show you where he says that. And when he said it, I thought, yeah, logically that makes sense.
I'll give you an example of where you're wrong and then we'll move on.
Hang on. After the event, now he's on tape, is pretty much going, if you're attacking the state of Israel, if you're criticising in any way, you are anti-Semitic. He seems to have shifted his position. Now, I think we've got to be able to make constructive criticisms and criticisms of any nation and any politics without being accused of being automatically racist.
Right,
is that fair?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, that is fine.
Okay, but that's got nothing to do with the conversation.
Well, it's entrenched in all of these conversations.
Well, no, because we're not talking about Jews in terms of
further down the line, if I start talking about what's happening in Israel, I will probably at some point be accused of being anti-Semitic. And it gets very boring.
That's fine. I'm not here to keep you on board. And it gets to the point where
people are afraid of saying things.
But that's fine. Let them be afraid.
Let them. I prefer it if they weren't afraid, because you'll get a better quality of debate.
I'm not here for a debate. I'm here for survival.
You'll get a better. Okay, but we're having a debate.
I'm having a debate, warning people on camera of the threat that Islam poses to Jews and Christians under the Caliphate.
Yeah,
that's what I'm here to talk about.
I put it to you that your chance of survival will be increased by having constructive debate.
Well, that's great. I disagree.
Okay, you think you should have destructive debate?
I think Israel will survive through strength, not through debate at Speaker's Corner. I'm here to wake people up to the
I'm not suggesting that Speaker's Corner will resolve what happens in Israel. I'm suggesting that having productive dialogues is the best way to get peace from everybody's point of view. And if you just back down and go, it's just about my survival, I no longer care about the ethics of the debate, you're more likely to end up in a conflict situation. We've got to agree on a common ethic.
We've been in a conflict situation for our entire existence. It's not my obligation to have a debate and entertain the moral grandstanding of those in the West.
If you were trying to persuade the rest of the world of the rights
I'm not. I'm here to wake Jews up to the threat.
You have a channel.
I'm not here for the world. For Jews. My channel is for Jews.
Great, not just Jews.
It's just for Jews.
Okay.
If other people watch it, myself, but I'm here to wake Jews up to the threat that we exist.
You're not obligated to give them a coherent argument then, because no one else is going to watch it. You're supposed
I'm happy that other people watch my content, but my content has one objective: to make the future for my daughter safer than it is for me today.
So you don't.
That's my objective.
You don't feel obligated to any wider effort.
I'm focused on survival.
Great.
You have the luxury of debating ethics and Speaker's Corner.
No, it's not a luxury. Okay? Having a basic common ethic that you can work from to try and resolve and adjudicate all of these.
You're right, actually. Next time Hamas are walking through the streets of Israel with a Kalashnikov, I'm going to jump out and say, guys, let's discuss the ethics of the situation.
Hold it.
Sabaya, here's why I think Sabaya are actually ethically problematic. I know you think it's a commandment from God, but wait, what if it was your partner? What if someone kidnapped your daughter and raped them and justified it with religious? Would that be moral? No, I haven't got time. That's not my interest.
Great. You haven't got time for ethics.
And I don't think it would work. I don't think me telling Hamas that I think they're not very moral is going to convince them otherwise.
When did I advocate that? I'm not a fan of Hamas.
But my content is to wake people up to the threat that militant Islamic groups like Hamas pose.
I happen to agree with you that extreme militant groups do pose a threat, and I'm not a fan of them, and I'm not a fan of Hamas, okay? Simultaneously, I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu either, okay? I'm capable of seeing that both of them are acting in an unethical fashion, in a way which isn't serving either of their people, and I'd like to see somebody up the ante on it. And this isn't a relevant ethical debate. So I ain't no fan of Hamas, I'm on record to say.
So you Western intellectuals...
Don't label me as a Western intellectual and part of a tribe. I'm an individual giving an individual coherent
And I'm saying you have the luxury of having a moral grandstanding because you are in the West.
There's no point that I could make a coherent point unless I'm actually being shot at in that moment.
No,
really?
I'm saying for me...
In fact, strangely enough, Joseph, people, when they're being shot at, tend to be less objectively coherent. You know that? When their backs are to the wall and it's fight or flight, they actually can lose sight of the bigger picture.
I've spent the last year running to bomb shelters, dodging rockets, and forgive me for not taking 5 minutes to say, guys, my platform, the Israel Advocacy Movement, it's here so we can have an interesting debate, and maybe I can help you reach a higher point of morality. And maybe you can help elevate my morality through conversation. I'm waking people up to the rockets that are falling on my head.
Fine, you don't want to elevate the conversation in an ethical direction.
I think
no, I want to wake Jews up to the threat.
Because if you're just going to
every time you've had to run into a shelter is been in Israel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not here.
And the example you gave about if Hamas come in, you're not going to speak to them about religion, about not taking sex slaves. I think you'd agree with me that Hamas are not strictly there to take sex slaves. They are there, whether you agree with them or not, to defend the people who are there. And
or to fight the people who are there. I wouldn't say defend, but yeah. I mean, they're not defending, they're fighting a war and killing their people.
And you yourself said that most of your interactions with Muslims has been positive. So taking aside
in the West,
taking aside the conflict, most of your interactions are positive with Muslims. What I have a real problem with what you're doing, you said something where if an eye for an eye was literal, you would still accept it because to you it's from God.
No, I don't believe it is literal.
But what I asked you was, if it was literal, would you still accept it?
If that was a religious Jew and I believed it was a literal thing that Jews literally had to follow, that's a religious.
Are you a religious Jew or secular Jew?
I'm a religious Jew. No, but I am a religious Jew. But if I believed it was an explicit,
so in the
no Jews are literalists. No religious Jews are literalists.
There's probably a couple of them.
Now,
okay, I'm talking about
on the spectrum of
what's ironic is that Muslims and Jews, I believe that out of all groups, I have no fundamental issues with the Jewish belief. At all,
except the rejection of Muhammad as the final messenger.
That's a big sticking point. Yeah.
No, but
I mean, do not take the Jews and Christians as your friends.
Even setting that aside, their belief about God to me is fundamentally correct. They have a religion about laws which they follow to me is correct.
Yeah.
So I have no fundamental issues with their religion. I think for him it's the same. And to me, what he's doing is just picking out things which will enrage people, and this is why when you said it's important,
I agree with you.
It's important to say there are good Muslims, and he's saying
I agree with you.
It's obvious to us. It's obvious to far-right people in certain parts of this country. It's not obvious, like with the Southport attack, which had nothing to do with Muslims, and yet mobs of people were ready to come down and attack Muslims. To me, Joseph, what you're doing is only inflaming that and making that worse.
Yeah.
So I can actually I don't disagree with you.
You don't.
So what I'm doing, I would absolutely agree that by me warning Jewish people of the threat that Islam, the religion, particularly when it has power, not when it's a Muslim citizen within a non-Muslim city, by me pointing out those dangers, and by me pointing out that history, by me pointing out some of the abhorrent things that happen in the Middle East in the name of Islam, that will undoubtedly make things less safe for Muslims that are living here, because people will not be able to differentiate between Muslims as individuals and Islam as a political system. And unfortunately, because Islam does pose that threat to those that find themselves under the caliphate, then it's an unfortunate consequence. I can't speak out against Hamas taking Sabaya in the name of Islam without talking about Islam. And when I do that,
why can't you?
But
because they're doing it in the name of Islam. Every time they murder a Jew, I watched a horrendous video from the atrocities on October the 7th. The one that sticks in my mind more than anything is there's an Islamic jihadi dog, a Hamas dog, grinning innately, shooting Jewish festival goers as they're running across the field, saying Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, gleefully screaming all praise be to God, as he's carrying out the most depraved act I've ever seen.
Again, is it that?
I don't know what. I haven't seen the. No, it was the one that they released to the press screening.
Okay, I did see the document. Did you not see the documentary?
I haven't seen it because I was in Israel. I haven't got.
No, I got to say, well, if you watched that, it was appalling to watch. It really was.
Were they saying a lot? Because I haven't seen this, so I don't know what footage you've seen. I've seen most of the footage. But if they were saying Alhamdulillah and Allahu Akbar, I'm gleefully smiling as they're saying all praise be to God while they're doing the most barbaric thing. It's impossible not to talk about Islam.
Yes.
When looking at
if you watch that documentary, what happened on that day was appalling.
And I would say it's not me. Ultimately, I would say it's not me that makes Muslims unsafe.
Joseph,
it's Hamas who carry out these acts in the name of Islam, and ultimately some of the verses within the Quran or the Hadith which seem to condone some of that behaviour.
That's a fair point. There are prescriptions that
what
seem
you're
to condone.
saying is that every terrorist act which happened after the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where certain language about crusades and everything else was used, it was the Christians themselves who caused terrorist attacks here in the West. We Muslims haven't come out and said, well, actually, all you Christians are violent.
Yeah, because it's
all
not,
of these
it's
wars
not
have to
Christian
do with Christianity, and yet what you're doing is saying what these select so-called Muslims are doing, who are doing it as part of a wider conflict. This is solely to do with Islam. You don't see how dangerous that is.
No, because what he's saying
we are not doing that when it's been the other way around.
Excuse me, what he's saying is that you take it, because you have more proclivity to take it literally than, say, Judaism does, it's more problematic.
So the Christians.
And that's a fair point. No. What the Crusaders did was not according to Christian
I'm talking about now.
I'll give you
now.
Can I make it?
The Christians going and they're shooting up mosques.
There's something
that's not Christian prescription.
There's something disgusting that
Christians
Christians do in this part.
It's not a Muslim prescription.
There's something disgusting that
go,
Christians do in the
get a
part.
machine gun and start shooting people.
I'll give you a comparable analogy. I'll give you a comparable analogy.
I think he's saying that it is within Islamic prescription to say that you should try and extend the caliphate, and that you will have a two-tier system, a two-tier economics, Yes. He's saying that that's inherently within the prescription. I don't think it's within the prescription of Christianity to go and do the Crusades. It's within the prescription of Christianity to turn the other cheek.
But to come to your point, there are Christians in this park, and they do so. Christians are the closest friends of the Jews today. And there are Christians in this park that say Deus Vult. Deus Vult was what the Crusaders would say as they slaughtered Jews.
Yeah, which is terrible.
And Muslims as well, 100%. And so a Christian saying that, if there was a Christian doing something today abhorrent and saying Deus Vult, I would absolutely be making the same charge against them.
And it would be a reasonable charge to make. But I would argue they're not being true to the prescription.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Here in the park. Yeah,
Bob is
that's my point.
Talking about doing military training.
That's why I said it's disgusting that Christians say that in the park today, with the connotations of what that.
Yes.
And the same, it's not disgusting to say Deus Vult. It's disgusting when you link that to the Crusades. Just like it's not disgusting to say Allahu Akbar, but if you say Allahu Akbar as you chop the head off a teacher, that is disgusting.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Everyone would agree with that.
I know.
No.
Not everyone, but everyone here would. Everyone here would.
But as it happens, hang on for a second. Wait. For a second, we three do agree on those things.
So Salwan,
which is good.
There was a Christian from Iraq who was murdered a couple of weeks ago in Sweden, and Salwan Mamicha, and he was murdered for burning the Quran. The overwhelming response from Muslims online, which obviously isn't representative, was glee, delight, like either mocking him, and the moderates were saying like, "Hey, that served you right." But it was a barbaric act to murder someone for burning the Quran. People burn the Talmud all the time. We don't murder them. We love our book. Let God judge them. Let God judge them for that. And that's the issue. The issue is if someone carries an act out in the name of Islam while screaming Allahu Akbar, most Muslims, depending on the act, won't condemn it. It really does depend on the act. Most Muslims I speak to in the park defend October the 7th.
Really?
Most of them, yes.
I haven't heard that.
I have. Not from you. I'm not saying from any of you.
Completely honest, I have not heard that.
I have, and I've only been here
In
twice.
the same
so
way,
hang on,
where you're saying plenty of people burn the Torah, there is an Indian Christian here,
yeah.
a lady who comes here every week, and all she does is say the worst things about Prophet Muhammad. Do you see us attacking her? No, she comes here and screams and
Hatun
shouts.
was stabbed in the face here.
Yeah.
And Edward
And that's
Littleborn
wrong.
had gone to murder you. So just because many Muslims here don't, other Muslims will take her.
How long was Hatun here?
She's gone into protection now. She's
So,
in
but I'm
hiding. Because there are people who are going to kill her for what she
again,
does.
is
so
it
then-
within the prescription?
I could
Yes.
bring examples.
It is in the prescription, that's why they do
Okay,
it.
then how come nearly all of the Muslims here weren't stabbing her in the face?
Because
They managed somehow, maybe subconsciously, to interpret the prescription in a way where they don't behave that way, yeah?
or you
Maybe
follow
they
the
were
law of the
abiding by
land.
some
It's more to do with
So-
you follow the law of the land.
okay, they're abiding by the law. You're saying, so you think apart from the law of the land, most of the Muslims here would be attacking
I
that?
would
don't.
encourage anyone to...
I don't think they would.
I wouldn't do this.
I think
but
the guys
you
who did it are just extreme
you
and
try-
psychologically disturbed
Okay, so
anyway.
question for you. What do you think would happen to you if you drilled a hole in the Quran in Afghanistan?
I think I'd be in trouble, but I'm not upholding the regime in Afghanistan. I'm not a
Okay,
favour of that
do you think
regime.
there's any Muslim regimes
Do you think you'd have to rely
Where-
on the regime to take retribution for that act, or the average man in the street might take action?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know is an honest answer. I don't know
No,
how
they do in
much
Pakistan.
the average Afghanistani feels that way intrinsically, and how much it's the regime. I don't know. Either way, I think you should be able to burn any book. Yeah, it doesn't mean that I want to run around automatically burning them.
No,
but
I
think
agree.
should be
You
able
have
to
a right
any
to
book.
burn, particularly if it's yours, if you own it.
Yeah, if you own it, you should be able to burn.
Be in trouble.
Yeah, you
It
probably
depends what your motive is.
No, even if
If
you've
I,
got the most
if
ugly
I burn a
motive.
book because I want to make a statement about free speech, that's different from me burning the same book because I want to go, hey, I'm trying to
Let's
take the
say you
piss
want
out
to
of
burn
you,
the
yeah?
you want to burn the Talmud because you believe that
You
Judaism is a
probably get
fascistic
second
religion. It's not, but that's what you believe.
Yeah.
You have every right to do
Yeah,
that.
I believe you should have the right to do that as well.
Yeah, God will judge you.
But I understand that. I think if you're Muslim,
but you probably
you think
get
the Quran
protection
is. You think that. I've heard it said that they think the Quran is what Christ is to a Christian.
What does your gut tell you?
They take it that it's that.
Well, I mean, they don't. Because Christ is God.
Well, yeah, the kind of.
I mean, Jesus is God.
Israelites will return to take down Islam.